So there's no any formal agenda for today's meeting. So does anybody have any topics to be discussed today?
I have a create a little Google Doc on more of a thought what this group can talk about. So if there's no other topic, I can discuss about that.
So here's the agenda document for everybody. Well, this group, anything related to open source, cloud, edge, and IoT topics are open for discussion here. So Victor, since you're new here and if you wish, you can introduce yourself, what you're working on, what are your interests. Maybe we can start with that.
Yeah, actually, I've been joining this meeting for quite some time, actually, on and off, not every week. Yeah, I'm interested in just a lot of open source areas, including, what is edge computing, the definition will need to be discussed. Yeah, so that's me. I'll let other people introduce first.
Cool. Anybody else new to the group that would like to introduce themselves and maybe share some interesting topics they're working on? So yeah, okay. Since we don't have any topics for the official topics, and I'm not that good of an MC for the birds of the feather discussions, and as Steve usually is. So I don't know, and if there's no any topics, I mean we can cut this meeting short if there's nothing to discuss. Please feel free to take a conversation into any direction you would like.
I have shared a Google Doc, more of a kind of not a formal documentation, but more of a thought what can be discussed in this group. So if there's nobody else have any topic, I can discuss about that.
Sure. Yeah, let's get it going.
Okay. So do you want to share, because I don't have sharing capability? Do you want to share your screen?
I can make you a co-host. Give me just a second. I'll try it now.
Let's try now. Okay. Let me know when you can see my screen. Okay. You can see now. Okay. Yeah. Well, this is more of just after joining this meeting for almost half a year now, actually. So I just some thought on what can be discussed. First of all, I go to what is the charter for the tech runtime and then IoT Edge work group, right? So I look at what was described there, and it's about this is for the runtime. It's about workload execution, management system, components, interfaces, right? So that's what runtime charter is for. And then I look for what is defined as a workload. So in the Kubernetes definition, the workload is an application running on Kubernetes. It doesn't go into much detail. So I actually like this definition better from Microsoft, actually saying the workload refers to a collection of application resources that support a common business goal or execution of a common business process. Yeah, so actually I like that definition better. What is the workload? Then I look at what is the charter for this particular work group under the tag runtime. This work group's mission is to enable the widespread and successful use of cloud-native technologies for IoT and edge computing use cases. Yeah, so basically, the workload and infrastructure, I think that's what I take from all these charters. So this go into more detail. In particular, the scope is developing and adjusting infrastructure for edge development, deployment, and then development and configuration of edge-specific workload. So this is basically modify what's general infrastructure for cloud native to be IoT Edge specific, and then write and deploy application workload that's specific for edge computing. So that's what there's another one I removed, which is about best practices. So I just focus on what's infrastructure and what's workload and what can be discussed in this work group. I also go to, because I'm interested in learning what is edge computing, right? Because edge computing, there's so many definitions. It's one of the areas that's really hard to have any uniform, there's no agreement on sometimes on even what is edge computing. So I went to one of the sources that's I think a lot of people agreed on is kind of a standard. This is from the CNCF Edge, which is also part of the Linux Foundation. And there's an article here about what is their particular charter, which is development of edge computing software stack, including infrastructure and support initiatives. So it's more of a still infrastructure, not about workload. And then they actually have a very nice, I won't go into detail here, but there's a very nice matrix about what is edge computing, what is projects that's in that ecosystem, right? So, and then in the CNCF Edge Foundation workspace, in their project called ONTAP, which is actually not CNCF Edge, but it's CNCF networking. If you look at what's in there, it's including not only Kubernetes, because Kubernetes is relatively new. So in the edge computing telecom world, OpenStack is used a lot too. And same thing for the Reno project. Sorry, I need to find where's here it is, because instead of jumping back and forth. In the Reno project, they also have same thing. You have an OpenStack as well as Kubernetes. So this, my understanding is both of this really kind of integration for many projects, right? In those CNCF network and CNCF Edge Foundation. So now back to what does this group do? So I think there are two areas that can be discussed about. One is cloud native components and interfaces that can be used to build CNCF Edge type of infrastructure. So CNCF Edge has been using some of the Kubernetes projects. Actually, many of them are already being used. So I think one topic can be discussed is what is out there in the current ecosystem, because there's always new coming, right? So really list of what's available, what new projects, components, interfaces are available to support what's going on in the CNCF ecosystem. Another thing that's really out of scope for CNCF Edge and CNCF network is application workload, right? Because they don't really go into like what you build for the business applications that run on top of the CNCF Edge applications. So I think this is also another area that can be talked about in this particular work group. I list some of the possibilities, right? This is just a random source, not really complete or accurate even. For example, infrastructure, right? It can be edge gateway, edge middleware, whatever is used in edge computing, right? So this is about infrastructure. And then also about workload. Workload can be, any AI ML application, any business application that can run on top of the edge computing infrastructure. And of course, there's more detail can be talked about. You talking about infrastructure, what kind of a edge node, edge gateway. Again, this is really just random thought, not accurate or complete in any way. So I think from all this, I guess what I'm trying to say is there's really, if I'm new to edge computing, I really need guidance to go somewhere to find out, what's going on, what new projects, new technologies are available for me to build infrastructure. I think it's some people also can also call it kind of platform, right? Edge platform. You can also say that, or you can say if you want to build a business application on top of the infrastructure, what cloud native components are available for me to do that, right? So I think from all that, the conclusion is, yeah, I think there's a need to build a documentation like that, or a kind of sort of a landscape about edge computing, which is beneficial and which is not covered by the current CNCF Edge projects. Yeah, so that's the whole suggestion. Any thoughts?
Yeah, I don't have nothing much to add. I think your perspectives are quite all right. We tried already to provide a couple of white papers that could help people coming to edge computing to do something, but we never tried to do the whole landscape thing. One thing that we have that I share with Leo here is the spreadsheet that Steve has helped assembled, which could be something as a starting point of what you have talked about, and that's collecting the whole list of edge related projects in different communities. So you can find a link in the chat about it.
Yeah, that was my comment. How do we know what the others are doing so we don't overlap? At least on the CNCF, the other CNCF groups.
Say there's because there's always a possibility for overlapping. It doesn't really matter. I think it really matters as a group. There's no one else in the world. There's a meeting, a group that's talking about something, about it, right? Because RF Edge focus on what's the infrastructure, right, the platform, but it doesn't go into what is components of the platform, right? It doesn't even go to talk about how do I build the next Kubernetes version, that's going to make it better for Edge, right? It just talk about how do I use Kubernetes to build like a 5G infrastructure, right? So I think that's why where this group is unique, in unique position to just list. Doesn't have to be even detailed. It doesn't have to be really accurate in the beginning at least. It just need to list all the possible components, all the things that's going on in the ecosystem. So this way, RF Edge, because right now we're using RF Edge as a reference to see what's going on in the edge computing world. But actually, I think it should be the two-way world. So the RF Edge folks actually can come to this group to see what's going on in the cloud native computing world to see what's available to build the next generation of the edge computing platform.
So there was a spreadsheet that Steve was putting together, this one here, which had a list of all the edge native type projects. It sounds like that might be what you're looking for in part.
I think that might be a good starting point. So if you would like to start working on the landscape, I think it'd be good effort for this group, and maybe start from this just a plain list, and then maybe try to figure out the categories and as you started to do, right, in document, and try to put a more categorized list of things, right?
Yeah. Have you had a chance to look at the list, Victor?
No, actually, I have not. I think I saw this before, but I didn't saw it this time. At that time, I said, yeah. So, for example, does it make sense to group these projects as part of the at scale management? I think it's a good starting point at least.
Well, perhaps, Dejan, if you could give me co-host, I could share my screen and just do a quick overview of the things in the list.
Here it comes. I want to just make a co-host here.
So my personal take is that there's a lot of rapid development going on, and some of these projects are a few years old, some of them are just emerging, and they each have their own little nuance. So one of the challenges is just comparing apples to apples with these projects. So things like CubeEdge, OpenYurt, SuperEdge. I believe we had a speaker a few weeks back that was comparing and contrasting a lot of those things and talking about what some of their benefits were. But as you can see, the list is formidable. I mean, Steve did his homework in coming up with a list of these things. So it's hard to do that comparison because each of them has their own nuance to them. Not all of these are necessarily meshing Kubernetes with IoT. Those projects are. Some of the other things on the list are doing things like protocol translation and adaption for things at the edge so they can talk to each other between greenfield and brownfield devices. There's things like being able to run WebAssembly and deploy that, orchestrate that across devices. And then things like KCP Edge, which is focusing just on the control plane, as well as like rules engines. So I think you're 100% right that there is a need for putting together some sort of landscape. But I think the big challenge we have is finding some way to tackle this problem because there's so many projects out there.
Thanks, Rob. Just to add on top of that, that this list is relatively tied to the white paper, right? The latest one. So these categories that you see will basically, as you said, at scale management. That's one of the principles discussed in the white paper, right? So that's also one of the challenges. So as Rob said, a fast changing landscape. A lot of things are happening, and also the problem of finding appropriate categories. But yeah, I think it would at least be a good shot at trying to define these and start working on it. So yeah.
I see Mark raised his hand. Was there something you want to add, Mark?
Yeah, so I've been hanging around in this space since about 2019. And I think in the 4 years, we still don't have clear definitions of what is edge. And I think this, there are a lot of components in this list. There is a glossary from Linux Foundation. There's a glossary of edge terminology, which is still not widely used or agreed upon. And I think that my sense, anyways, is that this is the Kubernetes Edge IoT working group. So it's really around Kubernetes cloud native concepts, but there are other things going on in Edge that are not necessarily cloud native, and you see some of those here as well. And Edge compute has been around for a long time, but it's not just compute anymore. And so there's sort of this problem of like what edge are we talking about? And I feel like every time I go into an edge conversation I'm in pre-sales, so when I have these conversations with prospects, it's always getting a baseline of what edge are we talking about? Is it a telco edge? Is it a retail edge? Is there AI? Is there machine learning and compute? Is it, sometimes edge for our customers is actually somebody else's data center. So they've got all the wonderful things that a data center provides, the homogeneity and whatnot, but to them, it is a remote compute system that they need to manage. And so I think anytime we talk about edge, we still have to define which edge we're really talking about and what the constraints are, because it's so vast at this point.
Yeah, I personally agree with that 100%. And I don't think it's ever going to be resolved. I think we have to live with that ambiguity.
I think it could be. I mean, when we talk about compute, there's like this assumption of data center. We know in general, we're not talking about like our home computers or, I think it could happen, but it's such a growing field that like there's no settling yet. I think a lot of things happen with the creation of data centers and their relationship, of course, to networking, and sort of how we sort of bounded compute within a data center, and security and networking and homogeneity and using virtual machines. And I think all of that just took a lot of time. But eventually we did get to it. And I hope that happens for Edge as well. But right now I think it's the Wild West still a little bit.
I think the thing that saddens me is that we haven't yet defined the primary scenarios or tried to set up some way of test interoperability between these solutions. It's still very much do-it-yourself endeavor. And I think Victor alluded to this when he was talking before. I don't know how we can change that. I'd love to see some way of better defining the scenarios. We touch on it a little bit in the white paper, but I still mostly just see this idea of a centralized compute in the cloud with devices phoning home. I'm not seeing an emphasis on other emerging scenarios.
So I think that Kubernetes provides a really nice platform for interoperability itself through the Kubernetes API, potentially. But then there are constraints which you run into depending on which edge you're working in. And so Kubernetes kind of fails at some edge solutions in its current form. We do a lot. So we do a lot with building Kubernetes clusters in the edge space, whether it's a single node cluster, not HA, obviously. And for some that's acceptable, or whether it's an HA cluster, but having sort of a centralized place to remotely manage many clusters. So managing everything from a single location, giving them the same API interface that they use for the data center. So that's sort of, I do, in my role, I see that happening, but there are always these, I don't want to say edge cases, but there are always these cases that that just don't fit, and that's where it starts to get hard. And you know, I was working with the automotive working group for a while, that basically they were looking at Kubernetes as a potential solution in the car for distributing workloads and changing the way they develop cars. But they ran into some problems with things like real time and the ability to do critical. There's something called critical. I forget what it's called, but basically it's time sensitive stuff. This workload has to happen now, and Kubernetes doesn't really have that kind of concept. It's a different concept. So they started veering back towards just pure containers, away from the Kubernetes API, and so that's kind of, you know, I'm just most of the time I'm just listening, trying to see what's happening. But I think Kubernetes is just one piece of the puzzle, and not necessarily, you know, it's not going to solve all of our issues at the edge in its current state. Sometimes we talk about how it can work with other things or be modified to serve more use cases at the edge. So that's always of interest to me.
I think you
Yes, I agree with Mark on that. Just to go a little bit deeper on some of the use cases that are a challenge for Kubernetes. Example, when you go how to place the Kubernetes control plane, the master nodes at the edge, is always a challenge. If you have two nodes in Kubernetes, you can have 1 or 3 or 5 control planes or master nodes. If you have only 2 nodes, then you end up with a problem of a split brain scenario. So that is a challenge. The other challenge we have is the shared storage. If some of the workloads require shared storage across servers or nodes. A lightweight solution is maybe not provided by most of the CaaS platforms that we have out there. So yeah, the edge is a little bit tricky in terms of resources, and Kubernetes doesn't help in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think we lack those key performance indicators in the first place. Like how much, what is the bound on the latency to storage? What is the amount of storage that's acceptable for these use cases? It'd be great if we could quantify what those KPIs are. So one thought that I have is when we apply hypervisor technology to different spaces, particularly like avionics, there are certain restrictions we have to impose in order to meet the safety critical requirements. So for example, in your enterprise grade hypervisor, you can deploy a new virtual machine at any time, and you can manipulate the resources that virtual machine has. But in a plane, if you're using a hypervisor, the partitioning of the system happens at first boot. And then after a certain point, there's no dynamic reallocation of resources. To translate that to containers, maybe for some of these edge cases, we need to question what parts of the core Kubernetes functionality is still going to be used. So people think of Kubernetes as an orchestrator that allows you to move containers to any worker in the system. And this is made possible by the overlay network. And you have that ability to orchestrate it every time. But maybe in some scenarios or edge cases, Mark, now you've coined the phrase, I'm going to have to use that. Maybe in some edge cases, we'll actually say that you're not allowed to orchestrate any containers past a certain point.
Yeah, and I think that the other another piece of this, besides sort of those KPIs, and Julio sort of alluded to this, but at the edge, we end up having to, it's like a must to run the control plane at the edge as well. And because of latency, I mean, I've never really seen a use case where it works to have the control plane not sitting next to the workers in a edge cluster. But that creates sort of an overhead, a base overhead that eliminates a bunch of opportunities for using Kubernetes at the edge. And you know, I've theoretically explored the idea of ways to get around that, as I'm sure many of you have as well. But as of yet, it seems like that the Kubernetes, we can't do that. And I think we're bound a lot by etcd. I've been working a little bit with nats.io and the kind interface with K3s to back the cluster with message bus instead of with etcd, which is something from the K3s distro. So it's interesting. You can get that 2-node cluster, but you're still really bound by the split brain problem. So it's still, I still wouldn't consider it HA. But I do wonder if, you know, it would be fun, I think, to sort of explore those possibilities a little further, and be able to say, here's HA, and in this scenario, you need a 3-node cluster. Here's a single node cluster. It's not HA. Here is a 2-node cluster, and it's something in between. It's not HA, but it has some resiliency, and allow that to be an acceptable model for Kubernetes at the edge. Right now, I don't think anybody's embracing that, other than some of our customers who are playing with it, but it's not a thing. And it's an area where there's a gap, where, retail has notoriously had these 2-node solutions for redundancy and failover that my experience has been that retailers, they have a very hard time conceiving of why they should put 3 nodes in a place where they only had 2, sort of problems like that.
Correct, Mark. I agree with you. I'm facing exactly that challenge today. One node, single node clusters seems to be working fine. With 3 nodes, we can always have the 3 control or the master nodes. But the consumption of resources is another challenge, right? When you have the 3 nodes, but let's assume that works. But the 2-node configuration is always a challenge, not only for the control plane, but for any storage solution that has some kind of replication in a 2-node has exactly the same issue where you have copy of the data in 2 nodes, but if one of them is not available, then the other node is not able to write, just to avoid data corruption. So the 2-node configuration has the control plane challenge, and if there is any kind of shared storage across, it's also a challenge. So that is one of the use cases we can try to address. There are companies that address the 2-node architecture with Kubernetes, but they are not following upstream Kubernetes completely. So there is like a little deviation just to make it work.
Yeah, and I think that's where I think to start with really describing the landscape, probably it's good to just describe what's the edge use cases and problems that exist out there. And of course, the project has to be part of a CNCF. This way, it doesn't go beyond too wide. And then also, it doesn't has to be anything, right? For example, Linux is used everywhere. We don't include the Linux kernel as a part of the project. Same thing for Kubernetes, right? We know Kubernetes is the foundation for everything, but it's not really specific for edge use cases. So if maybe Kubernetes itself doesn't even have to be listed as part of that landscape.
Well, the challenge we have is we have workloads that are designed on Kubernetes, right? So any change on the platform, let's say we move from Kubernetes to VMs, then the applications have to change as well. So the idea is for the Kubernetes applications that are out there to be able to work at the edge.
Same thing for the Linux kernel, right? Everybody depends on the Linux kernel. We don't list it, right? So Kubernetes kind of assumed to be already there. So it's something that's, unless people are saying that there's a new technology that's replacing Kubernetes. Otherwise, I think it's hard to mention cloud native without Kubernetes nowadays. More of a like the use cases and problem you've been describing, right? Edge, the problems that's unique to Edge compared with in a regular data center, and what projects are really tackling those problems. I think should be part of the landscape.
I think there are other technologies out there that solve the problem somewhat differently. We might want to consider them. I know like Nomad has been brought up on this call before. And then on the HPC side of the world, there's like Slurm, which is used for batch processing. Correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't this group go up a level from being the Kubernetes IoT working group to being the CNCF IoT working group? Yeah, I thought Steve wanted us to embrace that and sort of look beyond just Kubernetes.
Yeah, you're correct, Mark. Rob, sorry.
Yeah, no worries.
I think it's part of a CNCF. So that's where also I know Nomad is used for WebAssembly a lot, but the question is Nomad open source, and is Nomad also a CNCF project? If it is, then it should be included. If it's not, it should not be included.
I don't know. I'm just quickly checking that now.
Yeah, I don't know either. So, Victor, what are you proposing? Generating a list of use cases and then trying to categorize projects by them?
I think two tables. One is a list of all the problems unique to edge computing, use cases, problems. Then a list of all the CNCF projects. Then basically map the two so that we have a list of the CNCF projects that can be used to tackle those unique edge use cases.
As I said, like I would start with Steve's list because I think it has both up until some level. I mean, it can be worked on, but it's a good starting point to show like basically the white paper that this group published recently. It's not a list of use cases, but it's a list of principles for edge computing, and then you have all the projects, not only CNCF but and CNCF projects that are categorized by these principles. So if you're interested into that, maybe take a look at it, and maybe we can discuss this further on the Slack or on one of the next meetings.
That'll be perfect. Looks like Nomad is in the list, but one thing I'm not sure is, does that mean it's already contributed to CNCF, or is just part of the project in the ecosystem?
So as you can see, Nomad does not have any foundation affiliation in the table, right?
Should be in one of the three status, right? It should be either sandbox, incubating, or graduated.
No,
if
it's not, I think, in CNCF.
Yeah, if it's not, then probably there's no need to mention it in the landscape.
Yeah. If you wish to focus only on the CNCF, no. And as I said, the original list that we have at the moment is wider, basically listing everything that we know that's open source, right? So LF Edge and Eclipse and Apache, all the projects that we were able to collect that are somehow related to the edge computing.
Really, I think this is what the other work group has been doing, is only include the CNCF projects. This way, it reduces the scope. It also makes sense, right? Because this is something that CNCF can control.
Yeah, it would also essentially expose gaps for where CNCF projects might be needed.
From a pure user perspective, if it exists somewhere in open source, then it doesn't really matter under which umbrella, right? Because sometimes projects even change umbrellas. So if it's in LF Edge or whether it's in CNCF, does it really matter? I don't think so, right?
That's a good point, but it starts to go down the rabbit hole of not all open source is equal or open in the same way, and I guess that's out of our control, but yeah, it shouldn't matter what umbrella it sits under, I guess.
Yeah, because otherwise, like if you start to differentiate, and you even start to differentiate, like certain sandbox projects are not really quote unquote open source either, right? Because they're in many cases single vendor dominated.
Right.
So I think it's really hard to go and draw a line unless you're really inclusive and say, well, if it's open source, it's open source, and
Right.
and the nuances, I think, get you into a political minefield, which is why it's maybe better to be inclusive.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that. I think there are, I see like the Eclipse Foundation and the Linux Foundation kind of competing for vendor to contribute to their foundations. But I agree, it should not matter.
Yeah, it's they compete for marketing dollars, but as a developer, I don't care from where I pull, right? So if it's a mature project, then it's a mature project. That's what I care about, typically far more than it's in the right or wrong umbrella organization.
Fair
but that's
enough.
my personal view.
Yeah.
Totally agree. Yeah, from the user perspective, we just need something that works for us, right? Yeah.
Actually, in a way, even non-open source is not a problem, right? As long as it works. It is, but I think the reason the other project, other work group that do this way is, number one, it is under CNCF, sort of under the CNCF umbrella. And also there's a discussion about any sandbox projects that's been like staying there and not moving to incubating will be archived. In other words, they will no longer be acknowledged as part of the CNCF group umbrella. So if a project stays that sort of closed source way as a single vendor project, eventually it will be get kicked out of open source CNCF group umbrella eventually. So this way, my understanding, just talking to the other work group, is that this way, like if a project decided to like take it closed source or just change the license for anyway, it's easier to manage the licensing. Yeah, I guess this is probably not a big issue, include them or not, but I think regardless, it probably would be nice to have a kind of landscape to include only the CNCF projects, just reduce the scope, at least in the beginning, to make it easier to, not try to boil the ocean.
Right. I mean, can we do that though so this is the Kubernetes IoT and Edge working group. If we focused on the use cases that Kubernetes can solve, as opposed to the ones that it does not solve, and then just look at those, what it can do for Edge today. And from that, other use cases either can be discussed and talked about, could it solve those use cases? But then it really does fall more under CNCF. We run into questions of like, well, WASM, is it a cloud native technology, right? And should that be part of the solutioning that we're talking about, or should we be sticking with Kubernetes, a pure Kubernetes type solution?
So Mark, just one correction, as Rob mentioned a couple of minutes ago. So this group is not anymore just Kubernetes Edge working group. It's a CNCF Edge working group. So all the technologies related to the CNCF are in the domain of discussing.
Right. So then we get into the vagaries of what is cloud native, I guess.
Yes.
And cloud native Edge is an oxymoron already. So, right.
Well, I don't know. From my perspective, cloud native is what's the distinction between the edge computing and the on-premise computing, right? So, yeah, I don't know. Just trying to use the cloud native principles and technologies to solve basically, on-prem problems.
Yeah.
Well, I think the white paper that the folks put together tried to answer what edge native was, right?
Yeah. And what are the challenges?
This landscape could be part of that paper, which did not include the landscape. So that's why should need to be discussion about what should be the landscape.
It can be the follow-up based on these principles. These are the CNCF landscape that covers it, right?
Well, this sounds like a good discussion to have on a future meeting, and people seem interested in the topic.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we can do now to get ready for the next time we have the topic?
So we already have that spreadsheet of the project list. Maybe we just need another Google Doc of created for use cases and edge specific problems. Then once those are complete, you can try to match the two. I think that's the first step.
Yeah, cool. So Victor, if you're interested, take a look at the white paper and see if you wanna. I mean, it doesn't have to wait for the next meeting. You can post the drafts and things that you think things look like, and you can share it with the group on Slack, and things can go from there, and we can have much more thing to discuss by the next meeting.
I'll post in the Slack channel then.
Cool.
Sorry, I have a question. How do I get access to the Slack channel? I'm having difficulties finding the right process.
It should be still under Kubernetes organization. Let me see how I can share. So what difficulties do you have? Can you?
I don't know how to do it. I mean, do I need to send a request to somebody with my email, or how does it work?
Can you try to click the link I just posted? And see what happens.
Do you post the link?
In the chat.
Oh, yes.
Should you get you through the process of joining the?
Yeah, I get.
Hey, Victor, are you still there? Hello?
Yeah.
It tells me I don't have an account in that space, in that workspace. How do I don't know how to do this.
So, Victor, so I don't know if this is one of the use case, but I'm the maintainer for the robot operating system. So I'm trying to come up with the use case and the problems for the robotics use cases using Kubernetes. And maybe that could be one of the use case, because the robotics and robots are complicated and includes mission critical applications. So, by the way, yeah, go ahead.
I think that's why it's interesting to actually list the projects specific.
Yeah.
So you can really have the incentive to create a project, make it part of a CNCF sandbox project, and keep it going, right? That help the community that way. I think, yeah, this looks interesting. Yeah, it's just, I think, to be included. At least this is kind of a tradition by the other work group, is to only list CNCF projects.
Julio, can you try the latest link I sent? That's why that I found that people are recommending for joining the Kubernetes Slack in general. And then there you can find the IoT Edge working group channel.
Okay, I will follow the instructions. I can access the link, yes. Thank you.
Okay, we have a couple more minutes. Any last topics, thoughts?
I was intrigued about the comment about ROS and Kubernetes. I'm wondering, I missed a few meetings over the summer. Have you presented about that at this group?
I mean, like in this group. Hello.
Yeah. Sorry, what was that?
What is the question? Sorry, I missed it.
Have you presented about some of the challenges you've had with ROS running in Kubernetes to this group here?
Not in this group, but the KubeCon 2021. I can share the slides.
Yeah, that'd be great. The one that I'm most aware of is the challenge between running DDS with multicast over the overlay networks. I'd be interested in knowing how you are addressing that.
Yeah, at that moment we used Weave because Weave is the only one CNI implementation that supports multicast. So, but you know, like we can configure the ROS and the ROS2 and DDS if we want to, not using a multicast. So that's one of the configuration for the ROS. Yeah. But anyway, I will share the slides. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, tomorrow maybe you can put it in the agenda of the docs for other folks to, or share it on
I
the
will
Slack.
do that. Yeah.
Cheers. Okay, folks. You're there.
Have a great day, everyone.
Yeah, have a good day, and yeah, looking forward to see you next time.
Cheers.
Take care.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys. Bye.